All right, well, good morning and welcome to a talk on incident response and incident analysis. When Nora asked me to do this talk, I jokingly said, two great tastes that taste great together, and of course that's the title they printed in the program, so that's what I'm doing. But I'm here to talk about what you can do during incident response in order to make your incident analysis process easier and better and more productive, and what you can do in your incident analysis phase in order to improve future incident responses. A little bit about my background. Great Circle is my consulting firm. I help companies prepare for, respond to, learn from, and prevent incidents. I've worked with Google and Slack. I developed the incident management at Google program that's still in use there. I was hired by Slack specifically to build their incident management program that Scott Nelson Wendells now runs. He and I worked together for several years. Nora worked with us there at Slack for a little while. My background is tech. My background is infrastructure. You know, I'm a systems and networking person who has kind of drifted into the incident response end of things. Part of that is because of my background outside work. I've always done volunteer community service work in public safety and emergency response. I started off as a search and rescue pilot for Civil Air Patrol and worked my way up to being an incident commander with them. By the time I left that organization, I was one of maybe 30 people in the state of California who were considered fully qualified to be the incident commander for a missing aircraft search. Worked with community emergency response teams in various cities as a member and an instructor. These days, most of the emergency work that I do is with the Black Rock City Emergency Services Department. Black Rock City is Burning Man. We're the Burning Man Festival. So every year, we create a temporary city of 85,000 people in the middle of a dry lake bed, in the middle of a desert, 100 miles from the nearest major city. And that nearest major city is Reno, and it's not that major. For the couple of weeks that we're fully up and running, we are the 5th largest city in Nevada. We provide emergency medical, fire, and mental health response for that city. We run just about as many calls for service, emergency calls for service, as any other city that size in Nevada does in a year. We just cram all of ours into a 2-week period. So the pace that we're operating at is something more like the city of Boston or the city of Baltimore. Very fast-paced environment. I'm a IT manager for them on a year-round basis, a dispatch supervisor when the dispatch center is up and running, essentially the 911 center is up and running, and I have also a few times served as the battalion chief, which is the on-duty head of the department. So I'll have 200 firefighters, paramedics, nurses, doctors, dispatchers, and so forth, all reporting to me for a 12-hour shift. So that's the sort of stuff I do for fun, and that's the perspective that I bring to managing incidents in technology. I like to think of an overall incident management program as having 3 parts. There's preparation, right? That's your staffing, your training, you're setting up your rotations, getting your processes in place, getting your tooling in place, you know, your incident management tools, your analysis tools like Jelly and so forth. Then there's response. That's what you do when the pager goes off, right? That's where all that advanced training and preparation, you know, pays off, kicks in. So what happens with the on-call? What happens with your actual incident response? How do you coordinate? How do you communicate? And then all of that in turn feeds into the analysis leg, the review, the learning, and so forth. Some of what comes out of analysis feeds back into your product or your service. You make architectural changes to your product or service, but a lot of it feeds right back around into preparation for the next incident. Okay, so this is just a continuous thing, and these things are overlapping. It's not like there's a clean cut from one phase to the next. So, a big part of incident analysis, let's talk first about what you can do in incident response to facilitate incident analysis later. A big part of incident analysis is figuring out why something made sense at the time. Why did this make sense to do in this context? So the best thing you can do during incident response to make that possible to figure out during incident analysis, show your work, right? Say what you're doing and say why you're doing it, and do it in a way that's accessible later during the incident analysis phase, okay? Narrate your actions, share your thoughts, share your thought process, explain what you're doing as you do it, what you expect the results to be, what you were surprised by if it wasn't the results you expected, and so forth. And the best way to do this is to use Slack or some other channel-based, text-based mechanism. Slack, I'm biased. Well, no, Slack is best. It really is. But you can make this work with Teams. Biggest thing you're missing with Teams is threads and running into the 255 channel per workspace limit, but you can work around those. You can make it work with Discord. At Google, we used IRC for this, worked great. But some sort of channel oriented, not just a group text, okay? Because the channel has a life of its own. When you're on a group text message, you don't get access to anything from before you joined that text, okay? And so there's no history of the channel. There's no history there for you to go back and access. This works better during the response. It makes it possible for people joining the response in progress to read back and understand, okay, what's already happened? How did we get here? What are we doing about it? Who's doing what? It also works better after the response because, again, you've got a full record of all the discussion that took place, all the decisions that were made, all the graphs you were looking at, and so forth. Use a dedicated channel per incident. Create a channel for each incident and use that. Use the same channel for the incident review. The incident review, the postmortem, whatever you want to call it, that's part of the incident. Use the same channel as you used for the incident response. Okay, you've got all of that stuff and all of those people in one place. This lets people focus on this particular incident or ignore it if it's something that's not relevant to them. They can leave or join the channel. Okay, don't reuse a channel for multiple incidents. Don't have like one incident channel that your company uses for all incidents. That gets really confusing when you're trying to do the analysis, and it's going to kill you someday when you have simultaneous incidents, because you will someday have two incidents going on simultaneously, okay? So have a channel for announcing, a permanent channel that everybody knows about where you announce the creation of new incident channels as incidents start up. But that channel is just for announcements. You do the work in the individual incident channels. Another thing is that I sometimes see as an anti-pattern is don't use some existing team channel, right? You start off with something weird going on in the database channel, right? And you're working it, and you just run the incident there. But it's mixed up with all of the other alerts and discussions and everything else that's part of the database channel, right? No, set up a channel per incident. One thing, if your company uses retention policies, try to get your incident channels exempted from those retention policies. It's not going to hurt you during the incident, but it can hurt you afterwards when you're trying to do the analysis, and suddenly 30 days have passed and all of those messages start disappearing. Or a year later when you're doing a multi-incident review, you're trying to look for patterns in the larger sense, to lose access to all of that you had is just heartbreaking. So try to get your incident channels exempted from your company's retention policies. At Slack, we kept a standby channel available called Incident Next. Right, the Incident Next channel was always there. It was a new channel. It was empty, except for we post a few links off to common dashboards and runbooks and things like that. And we'd also pre-populate it with the key stakeholders. Somebody from the customer experience team, somebody from the communications team, somebody from the incident management team, so forth. When we would start an incident, one of the first things we would do would be rename that channel, and then our automation would create a new empty Incident Next channel, right? I'll tell you a funny story. The automation that did that was actually a cron job run by, under the identity of Slack's founder and CTO, Cal Henderson. He had a cron job that every 5 minutes would try to subscribe to a channel called Incident Next. And as you know, in Slack, if you try to subscribe to a channel that doesn't exist, the channel gets created. So he just had this cron job banging away every 5 minutes to join Incident Next. And if we had renamed one and there wasn't one, his cron job had the side effect of creating it. Took us forever to figure out that was what was happening because he had set that up years before and forgotten about it. It's like, where are these things getting created from every time? It's like magic. Anyway. As I said, during your incident, show your work, right? Show your command line interface commands and output. Explain why you were doing those things. It's good to show what you're doing. It's better to show why you're doing it. Explain why, okay? Share artifacts for the review. Log excerpts, graphs, screenshots. Again, all of this helps your responders during the incident. It helps the people that are joining the incident response in progress to be able to look back through that scroll back. It helps when you say, hey, what was that thing we were looking at a half hour ago? Can I bring that back? You can go back and look at it without having to interrupt the Zoom call for somebody to go project that from their laptop and totally disrupting things, okay? This also, another great thing about having these incident channels available later is they're great for learning. They're great for upskilling new hires, people that are joining your team, to be able, for somebody who was part of the incident, to be able to go back with them and say, here, let's walk through this incident we had, you know, a few months or a few years or a few weeks ago, you know, and let me show you some things. And oh, here's the graphs. And now this has changed since then. But, you know, it's really powerful, really helpful stuff to have those kinds of records. So you want to share your artifacts to the channel in a durable form, right? Think of them as like the tombstone, right? Carved in stone. A lot of times when we share things in channel, when we share graphs and dashboards and so forth in channel, we share links to them. And that's fantastic because people can jump to those links and then dig further. Like Charity was talking about yesterday, you know, if it's a dashboard that you can't ask questions of, what value is it, okay? So, you know, having a dashboard that you can say, okay, now I want to focus in on this time period, now I want to add this, show me what it looked like yesterday, you know, and great. But a lot of that stuff is based on data that's going to expire away or be compressed away in 10 days or 30 days or whatever your retention, you know, whatever your retention and compression is for your log data and your graphs and so on. So also share a screenshot so that people can see what it looked at the time. Slack can kind of help you with this if the thumbnails capability works well with your particular dashboard system and so forth, because it will capture a thumbnail and save that to the channel. But the thumbnail doesn't have the resolution necessarily. You want like a bigger resolution. The other thing you can do with these images that you save, these screenshots or whatever, you can put annotations on them. You can put an arrow that says, here's the interesting thing on this graph. And that's, again, great for communicating in the moment, great for communicating later, you know, when you come back to review this stuff, days later doing the incident review, months later when you're doing training or something like that, okay? Another thing that comes up during incidents is you often find things that are like, oh, that's interesting, but it's not really relevant, but I want to come back to that later. Rather than getting sidetracked on it during the incident, it's really helpful to have a way to just note it, right? Just put a pin in it, right? At Slack, we use the post box emoji. So we will put a message in the channel that says, hey, we need to look at why this, you know, alert failed earlier, or why didn't we get an alert on that, or whatever. And then we'll put a post box emoji on it, and that tells us, okay, this is something we want to review in the post-incident review, or in the post-mortem. And the way you do that is there is a search term called has: that a lot of people don't know about in Slack, but it's really powerful. It lets you search for messages that have a particular reactG attached to them. So you can say, later you can search for, in my incident channel, has: postbox, and it will find all the messages for you that have that emoji attached to the message, okay? And we even went so far as our automated incident management tool, when we closed an incident, it would generate a Google Doc from a Google Doc template, and it would automatically pull in all of the messages that had been marked that way into the Google Doc that it created, which we could then further edit and refine and so forth, but it was a starting point, right? Another thing about incident response, it's a spectator sport. You want to encourage spectators. You want to encourage engineers from other teams. You want to encourage people from the customer experience and customer care teams. You want to encourage other parts of the company because they can learn from what you're doing, okay? And so you want to keep those observers informed. They're not the primary audience of your incident channel, but they are an audience and an important one. So you want to keep them informed through things like periodic situation reports. At Slack, we called them CAN reports. CAN is an acronym for Conditions, Actions, and Needs, which is a nice, succinct format and mnemonic for, you know, what to put in these reports. You know, just a few bullet points under each and a paragraph description or something like that. It's also helpful to have someplace for the observers to discuss the incident in progress. Maybe that's a thread in the channel, maybe that's a separate channel, but someplace where they know, hey, here's where I can go and ask questions, and somebody who's not, you know, deeply involved in the incident or later can come and answer my questions about what was going on or what that meant or why people were excited about that and so forth. Observers should be cautious about interjecting themselves into the response itself, but again, use threads. But if you see something that you think is a ticking time bomb, you know, speak up. Say something to the incident commander, say something in the channel, whatever. You know, yes, you have to apply some judgment. Uh-oh, we just lost the video. There we go. Okay, as the incident response ends, I feel that it's important to immediately identify who is going to lead the incident review, who's going to lead the postmortem. Not necessarily who's going to write it, but who's going to be responsible for organizing it and getting it all done and getting the meeting scheduled and so forth. My advice is don't ask the incident commander of the incident to do that for two reasons. First, they're too close to the incident. You want somebody who's a little detached from the incident, who wasn't part of the response, to be your review coordinator, okay? The incident commander is going to be an important participant in the review, but they shouldn't be leading the review, in my opinion. Second, piling that onto the incident commander it basically discourages people from volunteering to join your incident commander on-call rotations. It's more work, all right? They're already making a big commitment to be available on call, to jump in when things are crazy, to expose themselves to the view of the whole organization and the whole management chain and so forth. And this is just one more thing to pile on top of that you don't need to pile on top, all right? So our practice at Slack was engineering incident reviews. The incident commander, as they were closing down the incident, they would assign the incident review to the engineering manager of the team that had been most involved with the response. If that engineering manager felt that they weren't the right person for it to be assigned to, that's fine. They could negotiate with somebody else to take it, or they could assign it to somebody on their team or whatever. They could not hand the ball back to the incident commander. The rule was it was a hot potato. Once the incident commander handed it off, it's somebody else's problem. Worked for us, may not work in your organization. So another tip, as the incident response ends, create the review doc immediately. Right? If you're working from a template from Google Docs, if you're working, in Jelly or whatever, create that immediately, right? Sometimes even before the incident ends, right? I would, there were a few cases where I would start working on the postmortem while I'm waiting for the last, waiting for the last half hour for the deploys to go out and so on. And I close the incident, and 30 seconds later, I post the first draft of the incident review, and people are like, "How did you do that so fast?" It's like, I had it done a half hour ago because I knew how this one was going to go. Okay, but post it immediately so that people can start sharing their thoughts and their questions and so forth to it immediately while everything is still fresh in their mind, while you've still got their attention. And set the permission so everybody can contribute and put it in the incident channel. All right, so now we're on to our incident analysis phase. We've dealt with the incident. The incident analysis phase is going to look at what happened and how did it happen and how did we get here and how did we respond. Those first three things are the obvious things that you always look at in your incident reviews and your incident analysis, so I'm not going to go too much into them here. What I want to focus in on is looking at how did we respond and how can we respond better next time, okay? So reviewing Slack channels makes this much easier than having to go back and wait for Zoom transcripts and try and make sense of the transcripts or go watch the Zoom recording itself or whatever. It's just so much easier just to go read through the channel and see the graphs and so on that were shared. So this is, again, one of the ways that how you choose the tools you use during the response pays off during the analysis. So how well did we respond? Did we encounter any problems with responding? Did we meet our targets for response, right? If we've set ourselves a target that when an incident begins, we're going to have people actively working on it within 15 minutes, did we accomplish that? And if not, what could we do to ensure that we accomplish it next time? What was the problem? What were the obstacles? How can we improve our future responses? Do we need process changes? Do we need to change, maybe our process is too aggressive. Maybe we shouldn't be saying 15 minutes if we can't deliver 15 minutes. Maybe we need to change it to 20 minutes or 30 minutes, right? Do we need tooling changes? Do we need to change our alerting system or how we've got PagerDuty set up or how we automate the creation of incident channels, anything like that? Do we need staffing changes? Did we have enough people with the right knowledge on call, right? And maybe we didn't, okay? Were there training gaps? Did people know how to respond? Were they prepared to respond? They may have been on call, but were they ready, okay? Those are all things that you can look at. All of these things that you come up with here are hypotheses. They are things that you think might help in the future. Don't become too attached to them, because they might not, right? Throw them out there, explore them, keep it blameless, but this is where you can fall into the counterfactual traps in incident management. If only we had had an alert for this. If only so-and-so had not been on vacation. That's not the world. That wasn't what happened, right? It's useful to explore, but don't get caught in that quicksand. The other thing is, on these things, don't try to come up with these immediately after the incident. Give yourself a few hours, a couple of days to sort of let it sit and let your mind chew on what happened and so forth before you try to come up with these, right? Soak time is useful. So, other things to look at, maybe not so obvious things to look at. How long did it take us to decide that this was an incident? Right? Often there's this sort of, hey, something weird's going on. Do we think something's happening? You know, and do we want to call an incident? My answer to that, whenever people would ask me, you know, this is something I learned in my pilot training from my first flight instructor. And they told me one day, if you wonder whether or not you're running low on fuel, you're running low on fuel, right? If the question is even entering your mind, the answer is yes. Okay, so if you wonder whether it's an incident, it's an incident. What's the worst that can happen from treating it as an incident? Your organization gets some practice at its incident response methodology. And it turns out to be a false alarm. Okay, no big deal. How could we have determined it sooner next time? All right, we'll look at that. Okay. What additional information or additional tools could have helped you make a better decision sooner? Could help you for next time. Another one to look at, severity levels. If your organization uses severity levels, did we assess the severity level of this appropriately in retrospect? Right? We assessed it the best we could with what we had at the time, with what we knew at the time. In retrospect, if that turned out to be a bad assessment, why? What was missing from our assessment? What information did we not have? Could we have had that information? Could we have made a better or quicker determination? Maybe not. You do the best with what you can. Again, you want to keep this blameless. But this is worth thinking about in your post-incident review. Did we have trouble assembling our responders? Right? Did we have trouble paging people? Did we have trouble figuring out what team we needed? Which team was responsible for a given service? Who's on call for that team? How to get a hold of them? Did we have trouble getting everybody together in the incident channel to work on the problem? Right? Did we have any communication and coordination troubles? Maybe not. Maybe we did, and if we did, okay, what can we do better next time? How can we change things to do better next time? Communications. How was our communication within the incident, among the responders, but also beyond the responders to other interested parties, to the customer care team, to the executive team, to the sales team, you know, whoever was interested in this incident? Did that go as well as it could have? And if not, how can we do better next time? Okay? And then tools, right? Did we have the tools that we needed? Are there any tools we wish we'd had? Are there any dashboards that we wish we had had? Are there any processes, incident processes that need adjusting? You know, about who gets paged when or anything like that. You know, could we have improved things? Maybe not. Maybe we've got this dialed in and this was as well as it could have gone, and that's a great outcome. But maybe there were some things that, you know, we could do better next time. Once you've gone through this a few times, you start building up a corpus of incident information. You can start looking across incidents and looking for patterns, like Dr. Woods was talking about yesterday, looking for patterns across your incidents, right? So these channels, these incident channels, become a great resource for that. And again, it's important to get them exempted from your retention policies if possible. It's okay to archive them. They're still there in Slack. You can still go into them and search them and refer to them and so forth. But try not to let them get cleared out by retention policies. So, when you're looking across multiple incidents, are you noticing any trends? Don't get hung up on measurements like MTTR, right? As we've heard from Courtney and plenty of other people, that kind of granular data can be very misleading, right? Basically, those are statistical tools designed for manufacturing processes where you're making the same widget over and over again. That's not a good description of incidents, right? Every incident is different, right? So you know, trying to get, it's garbage in, garbage out, basically, right? So don't get hung up on MTTR, don't let anybody else get hung up on it. But qualitative measurements, how do we feel about how we're doing? How do we feel about how prepared we are? How do we feel about, are we having more close calls? I mean, the previous speaker in this room talked about doing an NPS survey, I forget what NPS stands for, but it's basically, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, how happy are you with this, right? And how does that change for your team over time, right? And you can get a sense of, do we feel like we're getting better prepared and we're handling these things better and they're being less stressful or not? And if not, what are the parts people are worried about? Let's have a discussion about that and let's see if we can do anything about those things. Again, all of these are parts of an overall incident management program. But I hope I've shown you today some ways that how you respond can inform and influence and facilitate how you analyze, and also how you analyze can make you better prepared for your next response. Thank you. Any questions? I'm happy to take questions.